Hey guys, and welcome back. My name is Miss Danielson, and today we're looking at imperial and metric units of measure. Now, this topic tends to bring on a lot of discussion about which one's better, metric or imperial. While I don't want to argue here, I'm not trying to convert anyone, we're just trying to convert the units of measure today. I must admit, I am a big fan of the metric system because converting between metric units of measure is so simple. All you need to be able to do is multiply or divide by base 10 numbers. And by base 10 numbers, I mean 10, 100, 1,000, and so on. Here's my metric conversion scale in the corner. In order to convert between kilometers, meters, centimeters, or millimeters, all I need to do is divide by tens as I go up the scale or multiply by tens as I go down the scale. For example, you probably already know that 1 kilometer is 1,000 meters. To go from kilometers down to meters, I need to go 1, 2, 3 steps down the scale. So I would take 1 kilometer and I would multiply it by 10, 100, 1,000. That's 1,000 meters. To go the other way, I could say that 1,000 meters is 1 kilometer by simply dividing by 10, dividing by 100, and dividing by 1,000. You should also know that 1 meter is 100 centimeters. That's why there's 2 steps in between meters and centimeters. 1 meter goes 2 steps down, so times by 10, and then times by 10 again, that's 100 altogether, converts 1 meter into 10, 100 centimeters. Another conversion you must know is that 1 centimeter is 10 millimeters. You can see that on any basic metric ruler. And that's why millimeters sits right below centimeters on the metric scale. 1 step down turns 1 centimeter into 1 times 10, 10 millimeters. Or going upwards, 10 millimeters goes 1 step up, divides by 10, and gives me 1 centimeter. From these basic metric conversions, you can probably also figure out these conversion facts. Converting between imperial units of measure is not so simple because there are more conversion facts that we need to remember. They're not just base 10 numbers, and it's much more difficult to multiply or divide by non-base 10 numbers. For example, 3 feet is equal to 1 yard. You might find it simple enough to multiply any number by 3, so you can convert from yards to feet, but dividing numbers by 3 can get tricky. Very often this results in a recurring decimal. And 1 mile is 1,760 yards. Now that's a big, long number to remember. But maybe you know somebody who's 17 years old and someone else who's 60 years old. Could you imagine those two people maybe helping you convert between miles and yards? To go from miles to yards, you multiply by 1,760. And to go from yards to miles, you divide by 1,760. But what if we want to go from miles to feet? Consider that there's 1,760 yards in every mile, and each of those yards is 3 feet. That means that 1 mile would be 3 times 1,760 yards. That's 5,280 feet. Can you imagine that on a road sign? Next exit, 5,280 feet. Don't worry, you don't need to memorize this, but you do need to memorize that 1 yard is 3 feet, and 1 mile is 1760. That's 1,760 yards. Now, if you're an imperial person, you might be wondering, well, what's a meter? Well, this is a meter stick. We have these in most classrooms. And if you're a metric person, you might be wondering, well, what's a yard? In imperial classrooms, they actually have a yardstick. And you might be familiar with a football field, an American football field, where the field is measured in yards. Well, one conversion that you should know to convert between meters and yards is that 1 meter is approximately 1.1 yards. Now, I say approximately, this is not exact, but for our purposes, we're going to use that number, 1.1. So if we need to convert from meters to yards, we multiply by 1.1. If we want to convert from yards to meters, we can simply divide by 1.1. If we want to do conversions between the imperial system, remember they use yards and feet, except that each yard is 3 feet. Probably the most important metric and imperial conversion to know is the conversion between kilometers and miles. 100 kilometers, for example, is approximately the same as 60 miles, or 60 miles is approximately the same as 100 kilometers. This is not an exact conversion, but it's important to remember that miles are bigger than kilometers, so it takes more kilometers to be equivalent to fewer miles. Now let's explore a couple of metric and imperial means, because jokes are always funnier when you explain them, especially if they're math jokes. Let's take into consideration that 1 kilometer is approximately 5/8 of a mile. Now, I know we said 100 kilometers was 60 miles, and by this conversion, 100 kilometers, so times this by 100, would actually be 62.5 miles. Well, this is the conversion that we tend to use on our syllabus, so 5/8 or 8/5. We can just remember this in an easy way by remembering that to go from kilometers to miles, we multiply by 5/8. And to go from miles to kilometers, we divide by 5/8. Because remember, to divide by a fraction, we'll flip that fraction over and multiply by it. So really, to go from miles to kilometers, we multiply by 8/5. So looking at this first meme here, this guy who's crawling towards water, which is 1 kilometer away, as opposed to 1 mile away, which one's closer? Is he going the right way? 1 kilometer is 5/8 of a mile. That's not even 1 mile. That's about 0.6 miles. He's going the right way. Good job. And for this other one, I name my dog 5 miles so I can tell people I walk 5 miles every day. Is that very far? 5 miles. If I want to convert that to kilometers, I would need to take my 5 miles and I would need to multiply it by 8/5. If I do my 5 times 8, I get 40. And then divide that by 5 again, and I get 8. So this person's pretending to walk pretty far every day. Good for them. Okay, so just to sort of sum up our conversions right now, we know that 1 meter is a bit bigger than a yard. So I find that this diagram with my meter stick that's a bit bigger than this yard sale sign reminds me that 1 meter is more than a yard. And these little footprints coming across my yard sale sign should remind you there's 3 feet in a yard. And of course, my mile and kilometer conversions. Remember those magical fractions, 5/8 and 8/5? Just remember that it takes more kilometers to make up a mile than it takes miles to make up a kilometer. So to go from kilometers to miles, we multiply by 5/8. To go from miles to kilometers, we divide by 5/8, which is multiplying by 8/5. And what was that big long number we had to remember again? That 17-year-old friend and that 60-year-old friend? That's right, 1,760 yards is a mile. So now that we have this visual representation of all of our metric and imperial conversions, let's try and put this into a more useful format. Here I've got my metric scale over on the right-hand side. And remember how we go up the scale and how we go down the scale? This is all based on base 10 multiplications and divisions. When we go up the scale, we divide by 10, and when we go down the scale, we multiply by 10. And remember that the most important conversion between the metric scale and the imperial scale is between kilometers and miles. When we go from kilometers to miles, we multiply by 5/8, and we go from miles to kilometers, we divide by 5/8. Because remember, that's the same thing as multiplying by 8/5. But you might find it easier just to remember the same number for the conversion. But going from metric to imperial, we multiply. And to go from imperial to metric, we divide. Our other conversion that we need to remember is between meters and yards. 1 meter is 1.1 yards. When we go from metric to imperial, again, we multiply by 1.1. And when we go from imperial to metric, we divide by 1.1. So it's the same thing on both of these bridges between the metric scale and the imperial scale. When we go from metric to imperial, we multiply. When we go from imperial to metric, we divide. Finally, on the imperial scale, we've got those difficult numbers to remember. There are 3 feet for every yard. So as we go down from yards to feet, we multiply by 3. And as we go up from feet to yards, we divide by 3. Same thing as our metric scale. When we go up, we divide. When we go down, we multiply. But our numbers are harder to work with. Remember the conversion between miles and yards? 1760, that's right, 1,760. When we go from miles to yards, we multiply by 1,760. And when we go from yards to miles, we divide by 1,760. Take a minute now to hit pause and copy down that scale because that's the most complete and helpful tool that you will have for converting between metric and imperial units of measure. When you're ready, hit play and we'll go on and show some examples of how we can use this. Before we start, remember we can do our metric conversions more easily than our imperial ones because it's just multiplying and dividing by base 10 numbers. For this reason, it's always advisable, whenever possible, to only convert up and down which scale and avoid converting up and down which other scale. That's right, the metric scale is easier, so we'll try to stick on the metric side as much as possible and only convert up and down on the imperial side when it's absolutely necessary. So here is that guide again, and let's try an example. To convert from 121 yards to centimeters, I'll circle yards, that's here. To get to centimeters, I'm not going to go down to feet and then across because it's impossible for me to get across there. I'm not going to go up to miles because then I'm going to have to go all the way down the metric scale. So I'm just going to cross over the bridge I've got right here. When I go from imperial to metric, I divide. I'm dividing by 1.1. So to convert 121 yards to meters, I will divide by 1.1. Now hold on, we are not finished. We're not trying to convert to meters. Let's write all our working out before we calculate anything. Once we get to meters, we still need to go down that metric scale to centimeters. And that's 2 steps down that scale. So I'm going to multiply by 10 once and then multiply by 10 again. That's multiplying by 10 times 10, which is 100. And that will take me down to centimeters. So we're ready to convert from yards to centimeters by taking these 2 steps. The first one across that bridge, dividing by 1.1. So 121 divided by 1.1 is 110. And don't forget, we still need to multiply by 100 to turn our meters into centimeters. So that's going to be 11,000 centimeters. Now that last conversion was nice and easy for us to do, multiplying by 100. We just shifted all the place values up 2 places, or as you say, tack on 2 zeros. Let's try another example. This time we're converting from meters to miles. So I'm starting over here at meters. And I want to go first up the scale to kilometers so I can go across to miles. I don't want to go across to yards and then go up to miles because remember the 1.1, it's not entirely accurate and I'd rather only cross over when I need to. So I'll go up the scale to kilometers, which is the closest conversion I've got to miles, and the 5/8 is our key conversion that we need to know. So first, meters to kilometers, I've gone up 1, 2, 3 steps. That's dividing by 10, 1, 2, 3 times. That's the same as dividing by 1,000, but that's just taking me to kilometers. I still need to go across the bridge from kilometers to miles. When I go from metric to imperial, remember we will multiply. I am multiplying by 5/8. So let's start our calculations now. First, I'll do 1,600 divided by 1,000. That's just shifting all my place values down 3 places. So that's 1.6. And then I need to multiply by this fraction 5/8. Multiplying by fractions is simple. You just need to multiply the number by the numerator. So 1.6 times 5, which is 80. And then we need to divide by the denominator. That was the 8. So 80 divided by 8 is 10. 1,600 meters is simply 10 miles. Our next example, we're going to convert from feet to centimeters. So I'm over here on the imperial scale, and again, I can't go directly from feet across to centimeters. But I don't want to go all the way up to miles and across to kilometers and down to centimeters. I want to do as little conversion on the imperial scale as possible. So I'll just go up to yards, which is a division by 3. Then I need to take the bridge across from the imperial side to the metric side. Remember that from imperial to metric, we always divide. So I'm dividing by 1.1. Now that's only going to take me to meters, however. So I'm not quite finished yet. Once I get to meters, I still need to go down the metric scale to centimeters. That is 2 steps down the metric scale. I'm multiplying when I go down. I'm multiplying by 10, and then multiplying by 10 again. That's multiplying by 100. So there you have it. In 3 steps, I can go from feet to centimeters. First, I'll do 132 divided by 3. But don't forget, I still need to divide by 1.1 and multiply by 100. So I'm showing all my working here consecutively. 132 divided by 3 was 44. 44 divided by 1.1 is 40. And 40 times 100 is 4,000. So 132 feet is 4,000 centimeters. Hopefully you're getting the hang of this now, because this will be our last example before we start the practice exercise. So now we're going to convert 242 yards to millimeters. So clearly we need to go across this bridge here from the imperial side to the metric side. When I go from imperial to metric, I divide. I'm dividing by 1.1. So 242 divided by 1.1 will take me from yards to meters. But we're not done because we still need to get down to millimeters. That is 3 steps down the metric scale. So I'm timesing by 10, timesing by 10 again, timesing by 10 again. 10 times 10 times 10, that's 1,000. I need to multiply by 1,000 to get to millimeters. So let's do those 2 steps. First, we'll do 242 divided by 1.1, which is 220. And don't forget, we still need to times by 1,000. 220 times 1,000, that is 220,000 centimeters. So 242 yards is 220 centimeters. Time for our practice now. I'll leave this conversion scale here for you to help, but I hope you've also written it down because you really need to remember this. Keep in mind, you cannot just Google these distances. Although you will get the accurate conversion, they won't match up with the conversions I've given you here. And believe me, your teacher will know, especially if it's me. Go ahead and hit pause now and try this for yourself. And when you're ready, hit play and we'll take up the answers. I hope you had a chance to hit pause, because here come your answers. For question 1, from miles to kilometers, we just went directly across that miles-kilometers bridge, dividing by 5/8. For question 2, from feet to yards, we just had to divide by 3. For question 3, from meters to miles, we had to go from meters to kilometers, that was dividing by 1,000. And then we had to cross that bridge from kilometers to miles, that was timesing by 5/8. For question 4, from feet to centimeters, first we had to go up to yards, that was dividing by 3. And then we had to go from yards to meters, that was dividing by 1.1. And then we had to go from meters down to centimeters, that was timesing by 100. Now this was not an exact answer, I had to round it. Make sure you rounded it accurately. It was 256.6 recurring, so 6 is going on forever. If you cut it off as just a 6, remember there would be a 6 after that, which would round it up to a 7. For question 5, from kilometers to miles, that was straight across that bridge again. That's just multiplying by 5/8. And for question 6, from feet to meters, again, we need to go from feet up to yards, that's dividing by 3. And then from yards to meters, that's dividing by 1.1. So how'd you do? I hope you found this lesson helpful, and I hope to see you next time. Take care.